Hi, Armor Sports coaches, and thanks for tuning in today. I'm so grateful that you've committed your time to serving with us this season, and we could not do what we do without you coaches. The title of coach is a powerful one. There's some inherent respect and trust with the title. Being a coach comes with so many incredible opportunities to pour into athletes. The late Reverend Billy Graham said that a coach will impact more young people in a year than the average person does in a lifetime. What an incredible perspective. The title coach also comes with great responsibility, and sadly, too many coaches have abused that position of power and young athletes have paid the price. You might not realize this, but as a youth coach, you're actually required by the law, the State Safe Sport Act of 2017, to be trained in what it means to be a mandatory reporter, as well as the need to avoid one-on-one interaction with a minor in private. New Point would also expect that your conduct with minors always be in a professional manner on and off campus. A minor should never be touched inappropriately by an adult. Coaches shouldn't wrestle or engage in horseplay that could lead to even an accidental inappropriate touch. Coaches should not be privately texting with minors. These policies are in place not only for the safety of athletes, but for the safety and protection of coaches to keep you out of that gray area that could possibly lead to trouble. The student athletes at Armor are our most precious population, and I'll pray that this video will give you some tools to better protect your athletes and that the youth sports world would be safer because of this video.
Coach, thank you for giving your time to pour into your athletes, and thanks for making this video a priority. You may remember Jerry Sandusky, the longtime assistant football coach at Penn State, who was convicted on over 40 counts of child sexual abuse. Coach Sandusky was able to commit these horrible acts after setting up a sophisticated grooming system. RAINN is the leading organization in our country's anti-sexual violence world. They describe grooming as manipulative behaviors that the abuser uses to gain access to a potential victim, coerce them to agree to the abuse, and reduce the risk of being caught. Sandusky and his wife adopted and fostered countless children. They would eventually start a nonprofit called Second Mile, designed to help troubled and disadvantaged boys. Sadly, this became a breeding ground for him to build trust and rapport with the vulnerable population, like those troubled and disadvantaged. Without going into details, they're certainly out there if you want to know more, Coach Sandusky gained their trust, slowly tested boundaries of physical touch, and when his behavior was questioned, he used his position of power and years of positive rapport to stifle the Inquisition. No matter what research site you use, you'll find that in cases where children are sexually abused, 90% of the time it was done by someone they already knew. Stranger danger became a popular warning in the 1980s, but the reality is that less than 10% of children sexually abused were abused by a stranger. Another terrifying case study comes from Michigan State and Team USA Gymnastics athletic trainer and later National Medical Coordinator Dr. Larry Nesser. While not a coach, Nesser's role made him an extension of the coaching staff and had tremendous power, and his medical diagnosis could be the difference between a prospective Olympian continuing to train and compete or be shelved with an injury. Again, I won't give you the details. Those can be found online and in the troubling documentary Athlete A. But essentially, Dr. Nesser sexually abused young athletes as part of his so-called medical examinations. In his 2018 court case, 156 brave women and girls made statements regarding their sexual abuse by Dr. Nesser. These large and public cases against Coach Sandusky and Dr. Nasser helped lead to some of the tougher legislation and prevention. In 2017, a couple of bills designed to protect youth athletes were introduced, and in 2018, these bills were merged and signed off on, becoming the Protecting Young Victims from Sexual Abuse and Safe Sport Authorization Act of 2017, or Safe Sport Act. Additionally, the United States Center for Safe Sport was also established alongside this bill. The Safe Sport Act comes with three major components. The first, any adult who is involved with minor athletes is a mandated reporter. That means you, the adult coaching youth sports, are a mandatory reporter. We will get into the details, but according to Ohio law, as a mandated reporter, you are required to make a report to Child Protective Services or law enforcement if you suspect abuse is taking place. While a federal law, each state may have its own variation. The Ohio Revised Code section 2151.421 mandates that you make a report if you believe that a reasonable person would also suspect abuse or neglect. Given the same circumstances, a failure to report when required is a misdemeanor in the fourth degree, except in certain circumstances where a violation is a misdemeanor in the first degree. The second and third major components of this act turns its attention away from the coach and looks at the youth sports organization responsible for these athletes. The act states that youth sports organizations must establish reasonable procedures to limit one-on-one interactions between adults and minor athletes without there being another adult in close proximity. These youth sports organizations must also provide consistent training. We're interpreting that to mean on an annual basis. If this is already feeling like a lot, don't worry, you're in good company. This is overwhelming to most people, but know that you're not in this alone. We'll dive into what it means to be a mandated reporter, but also know that your staff member, Ryan or Hannah, will be there to help you walk through this process should you ever suspect something reportable. Let's go through the various types of abuse, red flag situations to look for, as well as who to contact in those situations here in Ohio. Being a mandatory reporter does not mean that you must have all the evidence necessary to prove something. It does mean that you have reasonable belief that could include observable signs of abuse injuries that don't match the narrative, verbal or written disclosure from a child, or information from a third party. Some red flag situations that should be reported immediately would be sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect and abandonment, and exploitation. Sexual abuse is the infliction or allowing of physical injury, emotional damage, sexual abuse, sexual conduct with a minor, sexual assault, molestation of a child, commercial sexual exploitation of a minor, incest or child sex trafficking. This also includes the solicitation of sex acts from a minor or asking for nude photographs of a minor. These should be reported to law enforcement agencies where the abuse took place. For example, Dover Police Department, New Philadelphia Police Department, etc. If you're not sure where the abuse took place, call your nearest law enforcement agency. Physical abuse includes non-accidental physical injuries such as bruises, broken bones, burns, cuts, scrapes, and other injuries include malnutrition. Physical abuse also includes driving a vehicle while intoxicated with children inside. If you have both marks and disclosure, call the police. If you only have a mark or disclosure, call the Department of Child Safety. Neglect is the inability or unwillingness of a parent, guardian, custodian to provide proper supervision that exposes the child to unreasonable risk or harm to the child's health or welfare. This includes the lack of food, clothing, proper shelter, proper medical care, exposing children to other harms such as sex acts, drugs, chemicals, and/or violence. Abandonment means the failure of the parent or legal guardian to provide reasonable support and to maintain contact with the child, including providing normal supervision, especially when failure is intentional, occurs repeatedly, or continues for an unreasonable period of time. Neglect and abandonment should both be reported to Department of Child Safety. Exploitation is recording, filming, photographing, developing or duplicating in which a minor is engaged in any type of sexual conduct. Sexual exploitation would be reported to local law enforcement and also to DCS if the suspect is also the parent. If a minor discloses information pertaining to a red flag situation, find somewhere in public to discuss, but out of the earshot of others. Never promise confidentiality. Any promise should be to do with what's best for the interest of the minor. Listen openly and calmly, being aware of your reactions and body language. Ask open-minded questions like who, what, when, where questions. Avoid leading questions or questions that suggest a certain response. Don't put words in their mouth. Photograph any physical injuries, if in an appropriately visual location. Document the answers as soon as your conversation is over so you are less reliant on your memory. And follow up with someone on the staff. Phew, take a deep breath. I know that is a lot of information and very heavy. Many of these may be hard to tell if it is abuse or not. Sometimes bruises and broken bones are a part of being a kid. So it is not always clear what's accidental or abuse. In a perfect world, none of you would ever have the kid that suffers abuse, but statistically speaking, that's not realistic. Remember, if you suspect any of these red flag situations, bring these concerns to your staff contact to help facilitate and document the process of reporting. You may also come across what you could call a yellow flag situation. These would include suicidal ideations, threats, or attempts, as well as self-harm, self-injury, or cutting. While still heartbreaking situations, these don't actually fall under mandatory reporting category, but we would ask that you notify your staff so they can inform the parents and call the crisis hotline.
Moving on from being a mandatory reporter, the second component of the Safe Sport Act revolves around the adult coaches avoiding one-on-one interactions with minor athletes without there being another adult in close proximity. Most of the time, this will be very easy as the environment usually has many other people around, but for your sake and protection, as well as the minors, be very aware of the exceptions that could produce a one-on-one opportunity. If you're the last team at the facility and waiting for the last player to be picked up, be sure to ask another adult to stay back with you. Especially with younger athletes, you may have a player that needs to use the restroom and their parents are not around. Be sure to avoid putting yourself in a one-on-one opportunity. There may be another mom who could take the child, or worst case scenario, have a second adult accompany you and the player near the restroom, still letting the player use the restroom in private and not with an adult directly present. If you're in a facility with more private spaces, like a closet or a classroom, make sure you're rarely in them alone and certainly never accompanied by a minor. Sometimes in a sports environment, parents need help with carpool rides. While we want our coaches to build community with their teams, this is an area you need to be incredibly careful with. If you're unable to have a second adult in the car with you, we would recommend you try to find another ride for the player, or absolute worst case scenario, make sure there is another player in the car with you, likely your own child, and have the other athlete sit as far away from you as possible. Similarly, for any teams that travel and stay at a hotel-like facility, no coach should ever be in a hotel room one-on-one with a minor unless it is their own child. Any meetings or conversations with a coach and minors should be out in public with other adults nearby. Eliminating these one-on-one interactions will not only help keep the athletes safe, but help protect you coaches from the perception of any wrongdoing. The last part of the Safe Sport Act puts the burden on youth sports organizations to provide consistent training. We interpret that to mean an annual basis. So if you continue coaching, don't be surprised when you're asked to watch this again. It should serve as a helpful refresher of the burden of responsibility we all carry and help you feel more equipped with things like mandatory reporting expectations. Again, all of us at New Point and Armor Sports are so grateful for your time and are excitingly anticipating how God will use you as a coach in this next season. Please be in prayer with us that all of these minor athletes stay safe and have an amazing experience. Thanks again.